Hey guys, after a little bit of a break, we're back for week 12 of the Bomber budget build. Over the last few weeks, I've been running this car really hard, and at this point, this car is in need of maintenance. I haven't done a lot of maintenance on this car up to this point, other than just little things here and there as I've either been replacing parts and cleaning things up, or maybe just a quick fix here or there. Other than that, not much maintenance has been done. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to do a lot of maintenance to the car, getting this thing completely freshened up and ready for Axial Fest, which is coming up here in a couple of weeks. So what we're going to start with this week is shocks. We're going to go through a complete shock rebuild on these Axial King shocks. I'm going to go through a complete rebuild, replacing lower seals, cleaning up the shocks themselves. I'm also going to be replacing some of the parts on the shock with some of Axial's new upgraded options, which are the King aluminum shock caps as well as the spring cups. Those are going to be available separately, and I like the style. The upper shock cap will be a little bit of a strength upgrade. You won't be able to pull that cup off or cap off as easily as you would the plastic. So that's what the point of that's going to be. Mostly though, I really like the style. We're also going to change shock fluid front and rear, of course. I'm going to stay with a 30 weight shock oil in the front. In the rear, I'm going to change to a 20 weight. Just want a little bit more dampening. I believe that stock shock is coming with like a 10 or 15 weight in the rear. Don't need a ton more, but I'd like a little bit more dampening in the rear. During the assembly of the shocks, we're also going to use the associated green slime, kind of the standard for shock rebuilding. So that's what we're going to start with this week for maintenance. We are going to continue going through the car as we go over the next couple of weeks, getting ready for Axial Fest. So at this point, let's tear the shocks off this car, get them cleaned up, and get ready to do the rebuild. The first step to rebuilding the shocks is going to be removing them from the vehicle. I find it easiest to do this by first removing all of the wheels and tires. With the shocks removed from the vehicle, we can then begin the disassembly of these shocks. I needed to remove that safety wire spring that I'd put on to keep my spring retainers secured to the shocks. We can see here why I'm doing a shock rebuild. You can tell this shock is about half empty. This was the worst of the bunch, and inside you can tell that fluid was pretty cloudy. I dumped my old fluid into a used water bottle, making sure to get all of it out by cycling that shock piston. You can see in there how cloudy and dirty that shock oil is. I'm using a pair of shock shaft pliers to allow me to more easily remove the rod end and bump stops. You don't have to use shock pliers, but they are a handy tool to have in your box. With how dirty the fluid was inside of these shocks, I'm taking the opportunity to clean both the outside and the inside of that shock body. Then remove the lower cartridge to the shock, removing those old O-rings and the spacer, and replacing those O-rings with brand new O-rings. During reassembly, I'm using a generous coating of the associated green slime. The green slime just allows everything to slide together a little bit easier. This keeps you from getting any nicks in that O-ring, which will allow oil to escape the shock much more quickly. While disassembling the old shock, I noticed that my rod ends were starting to get a little bit beat up on the trailing arm side. I'm going to take this opportunity to replace all of the rod ends again with some of the Axial black versions that I had sitting around from previous kits. I'm going to go with the same length that I had before, just replace them with some new rod ends.
Next, I fill the shock body about halfway full and then try to get some of the air that's caught underneath of that piston freed up before filling the shock all the way up and then allowing them to sit for several minutes to allow the air to escape and finally rise to the top. While reassembling the shock, you need to make sure that you get the proper amount of space left in the top so when you screw on the cap you don't get too much rebound on that shock shaft as you press it in. The new clamping spring retainers are held tightly in place with that 2mm screw that keeps them pinched onto that rod end. That'll finish up our shock build. Remember guys, proper rebuilds and oil is imperative into the proper tuning of your suspension. Do not run with no shock oil.
So the rebuild of our shocks is complete, and just by the feel of cycling the suspension, everything feels much better. It's always nice to get a clean rebuild on your shocks and just be able to feel how much better they feel overall. Now, I left the wheels and tires off. I do need to cover that. The wheels and tires on this car. I've already re-glued the tires to the wheels twice, basically. Also, the hexes in those plastic wheels have started to fail under the brushless system that I have in this car. So, wheels and tires are going to have to be addressed before Axial Fest. I've got a couple of plans for that, and I'll show you guys exactly what those are once we get to it. Next week, we're going to get into a little bit more maintenance and get this truck completely cleaned up before we get to that, though. So, watch for the wheels and tires episode. We'll go over tires, foams, and wheels, what my plans are, and what we're going to be running on this truck very shortly. But that's it for this week, guys. Thanks again. Next week, we'll be back to the same time. A new video every Friday is the plan from here on out. We'll try and get back in line, get things in order, and have this truck ready to go for Axial Fest with a number of new upgrades. So, thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you on the next one.